Imagine a ruler so infamous. His name is synonymous with chaos and destruction. Nero, the emperor who burned Rome, ruled with an iron fist and terrorized his people. But, as with all reputations, there's more to Nero than meets the eye. His story, though brutal, holds a lesson that can teach us about the human condition and the consequences of unchecked emotions. Nero's reputation is built on a series of devastating events: the burning of Rome, the execution of his mother, Agrippina, and the persecution of Christians. These actions have cemented his place as one of history's most infamous villains. However, it's essential to remember that Nero was once a child, growing up in a palace, surrounded by the trappings of power and wealth. But behind the grandeur, his life was marked by turmoil and fear. Nero's early life was far from idyllic. He was a product of a complex web of alliances and power struggles between the Roman aristocracy. His father, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, died before Nero was born, leaving his mother, Agrippina, to raise him. She was a member of the imperial family and a powerful woman in her own right. However, her ambition and ruthless determination would ultimately contribute to Nero's downfall. As a child, Nero was forced to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics. He was constantly surrounded by advisors, tutors, and mentors, all vying for his attention and influence. This created a sense of isolation and insecurity, fueling Nero's deep-seated fears and anxieties. He was a sensitive child, struggling to find his place in a world where loyalty and power were currency. Nero's mother, Agrippina, played a significant role in shaping his early years. She was a master manipulator, using her charm and intelligence to bend the Roman Senate to her will. However, her actions were also marked by cruelty and ruthlessness, often using Nero as a pawn in her game of power and ambition. This toxic dynamic would have a profound impact on Nero's emotional development, leaving him vulnerable to the influences of those around him. When Nero became emperor, he was just 17 years old. He was a teenager, thrust into a position of immense power and responsibility. The pressures of ruling Rome would prove too great for him, and he began to make choices that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He surrounded himself with sycophants and yes-men, who fed his ego and fueled his paranoia. Nero's reign became marked by extravagance, excess, and a complete disregard for the welfare of his people. The burning of Rome, a devastating event that would cement Nero's reputation as a villain, was just one of many tragic consequences of his rule. The city was engulfed in flames, and Nero, rather than helping his people, fled to a villa on the outskirts of town, where he spent his time playing his lyre and singing. This callous disregard for human life and suffering would be remembered for centuries to come. However, as we delve deeper into Nero's story, we begin to see a more complex and nuanced individual. A person driven by fear, insecurity, and a deep-seated need for validation. His actions, though brutal, were often the result of a fragile ego and a desperate attempt to prove himself in a world where he felt powerless. Nero's story holds a lesson for us all. It reminds us that no one is born evil, that our actions are shaped by our experiences, our fears, and our insecurities. His legacy serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked emotions and the devastating consequences of letting fear and anger guide our decisions. As we reflect on Nero's life, we're reminded that even the most infamous villains were once children, struggling to find their place in the world. Their stories, though often marked by tragedy and heartache, hold a deeper truth that we all have the capacity for both good and evil. It's up to us to choose which path we take, and to ensure that our actions are guided by empathy, compassion, and kindness. Nero grew up in a palace, but it wasn't a happy home. He faced challenges that would shape him into the ruler he became. Imagine a child living in a place where people are supposed to love and care for him, but instead, they're more concerned with power and status. Nero's parents, Emperor Claudius and Agrippina, were a complex couple. They were married for convenience, not love. Claudius was a powerful ruler who married Agrippina, the daughter of Germanicus, to secure an alliance with one of Rome's most influential families. But their relationship was tumultuous, and Agrippina held a significant amount of power behind the scenes. As a child, Nero was often neglected and abandoned by his parents. He was left to the mercy of his tutors and advisors, who seemed more interested in teaching him how to be a politician than how to be a kind and compassionate human being. It's said that Nero was often left alone in his room, with no one to comfort him or provide emotional support. Growing up in such an environment, it's no wonder that Nero developed deep-seated fears and anxieties. He became a child who couldn't trust the people closest to him, who felt abandoned and unloved. This sense of insecurity would follow him throughout his life, shaping the choices he made and the ruler he became. But despite the hardships, Nero showed promise as a young artist and musician. He was a talented poet and composer, and his love for the arts was evident in everything he did. It's said that Nero would often perform for his parents, singing and playing music to try and win their affection. But even in these moments of creativity, Nero's need for validation and acceptance was evident. As a young boy, Nero was desperate for love and attention. He would do anything to get it, even if it meant sacrificing his own happiness. This desire for validation would become a recurring theme throughout his life, driving him to make choices that would ultimately hurt others. But what if Nero had been given the love and care that every child deserves? What if his parents had been more present and supportive? Would things have turned out differently? We'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain. Nero's early life set him on a path that would lead him to become one of history's most infamous rulers. As we explore the life of Nero, remember that he was once a child, just like you. He was vulnerable, scared, and in desperate need of love and acceptance. His story serves as a reminder that hurt children can grow into hurtful adults unless someone shows them a better way. The question is, what can we learn from Nero's story? Can we see ourselves in his struggles and fears? Can we relate to his desire for validation and acceptance? By exploring the complexities of Nero's life, we can gain a deeper understanding of a human experience and the choices that shape us into who we become. As we delve deeper into Nero's story, we'll explore the challenges he faced and the choices he made. We'll examine the circumstances that led him to become the ruler he became and the legacy he left behind. But most importantly, we'll remember that Nero was once a child, just like you, and that his story holds a valuable lesson for us all. The fate of Rome and the lives of countless people hang in the balance. What will you take away from Nero's story? Will you see him as a villain, or will you understand the complexities that drove him to become the ruler he became? Join me on this journey as we uncover the truth about Nero and the lessons that his story has to offer. When Nero's mother, Agrippina, was murdered, he was left alone and vulnerable. This event marked a turning point in his life, one that would shape his future decisions. But what really drove Nero to become the emperor we know today? Let's take a closer look. Growing up in the palace was no easy feat for Nero. His adoptive brother, Britannicus, stood in the way of his claim to the throne, and their mother's death only added fuel to the fire. The trauma of that moment left Nero feeling lost and frightened, unsure of what the future held. Imagine being a child, suddenly forced to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics, with no one to turn to for guidance. As Nero grew older, he became increasingly paranoid, using his power to eliminate perceived threats and consolidate his position. He saw the world through a lens of mistrust and fear, and this mindset only intensified his desire for control. But how did this happen? What drove Nero to become so consumed by his own paranoia? One key factor was the legacy of his mother, Agrippina. While she had been a powerful force in Nero's life, her brutal murder left him with more questions than answers. He felt abandoned and alone, unable to process the trauma that had been inflicted upon him. This sense of vulnerability only made him more determined to assert his dominance, to prove to himself and others that he was a force to be reckoned with. But as Nero's actions became more erratic and ruthless, his grip on power began to slip. He made choices that not only harmed his people, but also damaged his own reputation. The once promising young emperor had become a shadow of his former self, driven by a hunger for power and a deep-seated need for validation. Despite his attempts to assert control, Nero's downfall was inevitable. His actions had created a snowball effect, with each mistake leading to another, until he found himself at the mercy of those he had once sought to control. It's a cautionary tale of what happens when fear and paranoia consume us, and how the choices we make can have far-reaching consequences. So, what do we learn from Nero's story? That even the most powerful among us can fall victim to our own fears and insecurities? That the choices we make, though well-intentioned at the time, can ultimately lead to our downfall? It's a reminder that we are not born with a predetermined fate, but rather, it's the choices we make that shape us into who we become. As Nero's grip on power tightened, his behavior became more and more erratic. He ruled with an iron fist, crushing any opposition and executing those who dared to defy him. The once celebrated emperor had turned into a ruthless tyrant, feared by his own people. It started with small, seemingly insignificant acts of cruelty. Nero would lash out at his advisors, often for no reason at all. He'd order the execution of high-ranking officials, not for any crime, but simply because they displeased him. His anger and paranoia grew with each passing day, and his advisors walked on eggshells, never knowing when they'd be the next to fall. One of the most infamous acts of Nero's rule was the burning of Rome. It was a catastrophic fire that swept through the city, leaving thousands homeless and destroying countless buildings. But what's often overlooked is that Nero didn't just sit back and watch as his city burned. He actually left Rome and fled to the safety of his summer palace, while his people suffered. Despite his brutal actions, Nero's popularity waned, and his people began to turn against him. They saw him as a monster, a man who was more concerned with his own power and status than with their well-being. But Nero refused to listen, convinced that he was doing the right thing, even if it meant harming those around him. In the end, it was Nero's own senators who turned against him. They saw him as a danger to Rome and decided to take action. Nero was forced to take his own life to avoid capture, and as he died, he knew that he'd failed his people. It's a tragic end to a life that was once full of promise. But what's often forgotten is that Nero wasn't always the monster we remember him as. He was once a child, a vulnerable and scared young boy who was shaped by the pain and trauma of his early life. And it's that story, the story of a hurt child who grew into a hurtful adult, that we'll explore next. So, what do we learn from the story of Nero? Was he born evil, or was he shaped by the circumstances of his life? As we delve into the life of this infamous emperor, we'll discover a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the consequences of trauma and neglect. Nero's story is a stark reminder that our experiences, especially in childhood, play a significant role in shaping who we become. As a child, Nero's life was marked by turmoil and instability. His parents, Agrippina and Claudius, were both powerful figures in Rome, but their relationship was complicated, to say the least. This toxic dynamic would have a lasting impact on Nero, influencing his future decisions and behavior. One of the key takeaways from Nero's story is the importance of empathy and compassion. When we fail to acknowledge and address the pain and suffering of others, it can lead to devastating consequences. Nero's inability to empathize with his people, combined with his own deep-seated fears and insecurities, ultimately led to his downfall. But here's the thing. Nero's story isn't just about the dangers of unchecked power or the consequences of trauma. It's also a reminder that no one is born evil. We're all shaped by our experiences, and it's up to us to choose a different path. We all have the capacity for kindness, compassion, and empathy, but it requires effort and dedication to develop these traits. As we reflect on Nero's life, let's remember that we all have the power to choose how we live our lives. We can learn from his mistakes and strive to become better versions of ourselves. By acknowledging the pain and suffering of others, we can create a more compassionate and empathetic world. So, what can we take away from Nero's story? That even in the darkest of times, there's always hope for redemption and change. And that's a lesson that's just as relevant today as it was in ancient Rome.